Welcome to Miss Scarlett. Subscribe and don't miss out on Patreon. Have fun! The detritus of Patrick's breakfast lay on his shirt like the outlines of an accident. Still chewing a final mouthful of pastry, he grabbed his paper napkin and attempted to absorb the stain. Syrupy trails went unused by the tissue and colored the white cotton brown like an antique document. Looking up at the clock, Patrick turned bright with anxiety. There was no time to regroup. He'd have to face the early meeting head-on, with his unfamiliar state of carelessness proving a new jacket of disorder to his smooth, professional exterior. He imagined the amusement of his colleagues and took it oddly in stride. The early morning hassle revealing a sense of humor in him. He headed out to the parking lot. An idea struck him. Emma always kept an emergency outfit in her car for unexpected overnights or last-minute plans. It was a long shot, but maybe she had something he could borrow. Patrick tried the door handle and found it unlocked.
"Sorry, sis,"
he said, popping open the trunk.
"Desperate times."
Buried under a jumble of reusable grocery bags and gym clothes, he found a garment bag. Patrick unzipped it, expecting, praying for, a unisex button-down, or at least a polo shirt. Instead, he found himself staring at a silky red wrap dress. Patrick's first instinct was to zip the bag back up and forget he'd ever seen it. There was no way he could wear a dress to work. It was ridiculous. Absurd. Career suicide. And yet, he glanced down at his ruined shirt, then back at the dress. The client meeting started in 20 minutes. If he showed up looking like he'd lost a fight with the office Keurig, the account was as good as gone.
"This is insane,"
Patrick muttered, but he grabbed the garment bag and ducked into the back seat of Emma's car. 5 frantic minutes later, he emerged, tugging self-consciously at the hem of the wrap dress. It fit surprisingly well, hugging his slim build in a way that almost looked natural. The V-neck neckline showed more chest than he was used to, but nothing scandalous. Patrick caught his reflection in the car window and barely recognized himself. With his brown hair slightly tousled and his lean legs exposed, he looked pretty, feminine. A thrill of excitement mixed with his anxiety. He'd never allowed himself to explore this side of himself, always tamping down any urges that didn't fit into the neat box of masculinity. But now, thrust into this scenario by chance, he felt a spark of something he couldn't quite name. At the bottom of the garment bag, he found a pair of black pumps. Patrick slipped them on, wobbling slightly as he adjusted to the height. The heels clicked satisfyingly against the pavement as he made his way back into the office building. His heart pounded as he stepped into the elevator. This was madness. Everyone would stare. He'd be laughed out of the building. But when the doors opened onto his floor, no one batted an eye. His co-workers bustled past, absorbed in their own Friday afternoon tasks. Patrick made it all the way to his cubicle without incident. He sank into his chair, breathing a sigh of relief. Maybe he could pull this off after all. He just had to get through the client meeting without anyone noticing.
"Excuse me, miss."
Patrick's head snapped up. His boss, Sandra, was standing in front of his desk with a quizzical expression. "I'm sorry, I don't think we've met," Sandra said. "Are you new? From the marketing department, maybe?" Patrick opened his mouth, ready to explain the whole embarrassing situation. But something made him hesitate.
"I'm Delilah,"
he heard himself say. "I just started this week." Sandra's face lit up. "Oh, wonderful! We're always happy to have fresh talent on board. Listen, we're about to head into a big client meeting. Would you like to sit in? It would be a great learning opportunity." Patrick, no, Delilah, nodded, hardly believing what was happening. "I'd love to," she said. As she followed Sandra to the conference room, Delilah marveled at how natural it felt. The click of her heels, the swish of the dress against her legs, the way she instinctively tucked a strand of brown hair behind her ear. It all felt right in a way nothing ever had before. The client meeting went off without a hitch. Delilah even chimed in with a few insightful comments that impressed both the clients and her colleagues. As they filed out of the conference room, Sandra pulled her aside. "That was fantastic work in there, Delilah," she said. "I have to say, I'm impressed. How would you feel about taking point on this account moving forward?" Delilah's mind reeled. This was Patrick's big chance, the opportunity he'd been working towards for months. But it wasn't being offered to Patrick. It was being offered to her. "I'd be honored," Delilah said, surprising herself with the confidence in her voice. As the day wore on, Delilah found herself settling more and more into her new identity. She chatted easily with her coworkers, reveling in the camaraderie she'd never quite achieved as Patrick. When one of the women from accounting complimented her dress, she beamed with pride. By the time 5 o'clock rolled around, Delilah was flying high on a wave of newfound self-assurance. She gathered her things, said her goodbyes, and headed for the parking lot with a spring in her step. Reality came crashing back as she approached Emma's car. The spell was broken. She had to change back into Patrick's coffee-stained clothes and return to her real life. Delilah's hand hesitated on the car door handle. The thought of going back filled her with a deep, aching sadness. For the first time in her life, she'd felt truly comfortable in her own skin. The idea of giving that up was almost unbearable. She squared her shoulders, making a decision. This didn't have to be the end. It could be a beginning. Instead of changing, Delilah got into the driver's seat and pulled out her phone. Her fingers trembled slightly as she dialed Emma's number. "Hey, sis," she said when Emma picked up. "I need to talk to you about something important. Can we meet for coffee?" An hour later, Delilah sat across from her sister in a cozy cafe, clutching a latte for dear life. She'd spent the drive over rehearsing what to say, but now that the moment was here, words failed her. Emma eyed her curiously. "So, are we going to talk about the elephant in the room? Or should I say, the dress?" Delilah let out a shaky laugh. "I can explain. Well, sort of. I'm not sure I understand it myself." She launched into the story of her day, watching Emma's expression shift from confusion to surprise to understanding. When she finished, Emma reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "Oh, sweetie," she said softly. "I had no idea you were struggling with this, but I'm so glad you felt safe enough to tell me." Delilah's eyes welled up with tears of relief. "You're not weirded out?" Emma shook her head firmly. "Not at all. I love you, no matter what. Patrick or Delilah, you're my sibling, and I support you 100%. They spent the next few hours talking, laughing, and planning. Emma offered her entire wardrobe to Delilah as she figured out her style. They made appointments with therapists who specialized in gender identity issues. By the time they said goodbye, Delilah felt like a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of change and self-discovery. Delilah came out to her parents, who were initially shocked but ultimately supportive. She began the process of legally changing her name and started hormone therapy. At work, she sat down with Sandra and HR to explain her situation. To her immense relief, they were understanding and accommodating. A memo went out to the entire company announcing Delilah's transition and requesting that everyone use her new name and pronouns. There were challenges, of course. Some coworkers struggled with the change, stumbling over pronouns or avoiding her altogether. Delilah faced stares and whispers when she ventured out in public, but for every negative experience, there were moments of pure joy and affirmation. The first time a stranger called her Miss without hesitation. The day she tried on a skirt and marveled at how right it felt. The evening she and Emma spent giggling as they painted each other's nails. As the months passed, Delilah blossomed. Her body began to change, softening in some places and curving in others. She grew more confident in her presentation, experimenting with makeup and accessories. The red wrap dress that had started it all became a cherished item in her wardrobe, a reminder of the day she'd finally allowed herself to be true. 1 year to the day after her accidental transformation, Delilah stood in front of her full-length mirror, hardly recognizing the woman who looked back at her. Gone was the uncomfortable, ill-fitting mask of masculinity she'd worn for so long. In its place was a radiant, self-assured woman with sparkling eyes and a megawatt smile. She smoothed down the front of her favorite red dress, marveling at how it hugged her curves. Her brown hair, now grown out past her shoulders, framed her face in soft waves. A delicate gold necklace glinted at her throat, a gift from Emma to mark the anniversary. As she slipped on her black pumps, the very same pair from that fateful day, Delilah felt a surge of gratitude for the coffee spill that had set everything in motion, for her sister's unwavering support, for her own courage in embracing her true self. She grabbed her purse and headed out the door, ready to take on the world as her authentic self. As she walked to her car, the spring sunshine warm on her face, Delilah couldn't help but smile. Life wasn't perfect, but it was real and it was hers, and she wouldn't have it any other way. The office buzzed with energy as Delilah stepped off the elevator. Coworkers greeted her warmly, complimenting her outfit and asking about her weekend plans. She basked in the easy camaraderie, still amazed at how much more connected she felt to those around her now that she was living authentically. As she settled in at her desk, Sandra appeared with a steaming mug of coffee. "Morning, Delilah," she said, setting the cup down. "Got a minute to chat?" Delilah nodded, following her boss to a quiet corner of the office. Sandra's expression was serious, but not unkind. "I wanted to let you know that the Robertson account is officially yours," Sandra said. "Your work over the past year has been exemplary, and the client specifically requested you as their point person moving forward." Delilah's heart soared. The Robertson account was one of the biggest in the company. This was a major vote of confidence. "Thank you so much," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I won't let you down." Sandra smiled warmly. "I know you won't. And Delilah? I just want to say how proud I am of you. The courage and grace you've shown throughout your transition has been truly inspiring. You've made this company a better, more inclusive place just by being yourself." Tears pricked at Delilah's eyes. She blinked them back, not wanting to ruin her mascara before the day had even really begun. "That means more than you know," she said softly. As she returned to her desk, Delilah's phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "Lunch today? I have big news." Delilah grinned, firing back a quick, "Absolutely," before diving into her work. The morning flew by in a flurry of emails, phone calls, and strategy meetings. Before she knew it, it was time to meet Emma. They met at their favorite sidewalk cafe, claiming a sunny table with a view of the bustling street. Emma was practically vibrating with excitement as they ordered. Okay, spill, Delilah said, laughing. What's this big news? Emma took a deep breath. I got the job. The one in New York, with the fashion magazine. They want me to start next month. Delilah squealed, drawing amused looks from nearby diners. She didn't care. Em, that's amazing! I'm so proud of you! As they celebrated over salads and iced tea, a bittersweet feeling settled in Delilah's chest. She was thrilled for her sister, but the thought of Emma moving across the country made her heart ache. I'm going to miss you so much, she admitted, reaching for Emma's hand. Emma squeezed back. I know. I'll miss you too, but this doesn't change anything between us, okay? We'll talk every day, and you'll come visit, right? We can do all the touristy New York things together. Delilah nodded, forcing a smile. Of course. And who knows? Maybe I'll end up following you there someday? As they walked back to their respective offices, Delilah's mind raced. She'd been so focused on her transition and establishing herself in her new identity that she hadn't given much thought to her long-term future. But now, with Emma's impending move, she found herself questioning everything. Did she want to stay in this city forever? Was she truly fulfilled in her current job? What did she want her life to look like in 5 years? 10? The questions swirled in her mind as she tried to focus on work for the rest of the afternoon. By the time she left the office, she'd made a decision. It was time for a change. Delilah spent the next few weeks in a frenzy of planning and preparation. She put in her notice at work, promising to stay on long enough to transition her accounts to other team members. She listed her apartment for rent and started researching neighborhoods in New York City. The day before her flight to New York, Delilah stood in her mostly empty apartment, surrounded by boxes and suitcases. She held up 2 dresses, deliberating. The red wrap dress that had started it all, or the sleek black sheath she'd worn to her first LGBT mixer. In the end, she packed them both. They were part of her story now, reminders of how far she'd come. As she zipped up her last suitcase, Delilah caught sight of herself in the mirror. Her brown hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and she wore leggings and an oversized sweater, comfortable clothes for a long day of travel. But even in this casual state, she radiated a quiet confidence that had been missing for most of her life. She thought back to that flustered, coffee-stained Patrick who had stumbled into Emma's car a year ago. He'd been so lost, so disconnected from himself. Delilah sent a silent thank you to that version of herself for having the courage to take that first step, even if it had been born of desperation. The next morning, Emma and Delilah boarded a plane bound for New York City. As they settled into their seats, Delilah felt a mix of excitement and nerves fluttering in her stomach. You okay? Emma asked, noticing her sister's expression. Delilah nodded, smiling. Just thinking about how much has changed in a year. If you'd told me back then that I'd be moving to New York as my true self, I never would have believed it. Emma squeezed her hand. I'm so proud of you, Del. You've come so far. As the plane took off, Delilah gazed out the window at the shrinking landscape below. She didn't know exactly what the future held, but for the first time in her life, she felt ready to face it head on. The first few weeks in New York were a whirlwind of apartment hunting, job interviews, and exploring the city. Delilah marveled at the energy and diversity around her. Here, she felt like just another face in the crowd, not a curiosity or a topic of gossip, but simply herself. She found a tiny but charming studio apartment in Brooklyn, with a fire escape that offered a sliver of a view of the Manhattan skyline. It wasn't much, but it was hers. As she hung up her clothes in the closet, including the red wrap dress, which now held a place of honor, Delilah felt a sense of true independence for the first time. Job hunting proved to be more challenging than she'd anticipated. While her experience was solid, the New York market was intensely competitive. Delilah found herself going on interview after interview, each one leaving her feeling more discouraged than the last. After a particularly rough day of rejections, Delilah trudged into her favorite local coffee shop, in desperate need of caffeine and comfort. As she waited for her latte, she overheard a conversation at a nearby table. "I'm telling you, we need someone with fresh ideas," a woman was saying. "The campaign is stalling, and if we don't turn it around soon, we'll lose the account." Delilah's ears perked up. Before she could stop herself, she turned to the table. "I'm sorry, I couldn't help overhearing. Are you talking about an advertising campaign?" The woman looked surprised, but nodded. "Yes, we are. Why do you ask?" Taking a deep breath, Delilah launched into an impromptu pitch, drawing on her experience with the Robertson account back home. She outlined a strategy that would breathe new life into the campaign while staying true to the brand's core message. As she finished speaking, Delilah suddenly realized what she'd done. She flushed, embarrassed by her boldness. "I'm so sorry," she stammered. "I didn't mean to interrupt." But the woman was smiling. She stood and extended her hand. "I'm Olivia Chen, creative director at Spark Advertising, and I think you might have just saved our bacon. Would you be interested in coming in for a formal interview?" Delilah blinked, hardly daring to believe her luck. Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much." As she floated home from the coffee shop, Delilah's phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "Drinks tonight to celebrate your first month in NYC?" Delilah grinned, typing back, "You bet, and I might have some good news to share." That evening, as they clinked glasses in a cozy wine bar, Delilah filled Emma in on her impromptu coffee shop pitch. Emma squealed with delight, drawing amused looks from nearby patrons. "I knew you'd land on your feet," she said, beaming with pride. "New York suits you, sis." Delilah nodded, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the wine. "It really does. I feel like I can finally breathe here, you know? Like I'm free to be exactly who I am, without explanation or apology." Emma's expression softened. "I'm so happy for you, Del. You deserve this." As they finished their drinks and stepped out into the warm summer night, Delilah linked her arm through her sister's. "Thanks for always being in my corner, Em. I couldn't have done any of this without you." Emma bumped her hip playfully. "That's what sisters are for. Now come on, let's go find some New York-style pizza. I'm starving." Laughing, they set off down the bustling sidewalk, two sisters taking on the big city together. The next morning, Delilah stood in front of her closet, deliberating. The interview at Spark Advertising was in 2 hours, and she wanted to make the perfect impression. Her hand hesitated over the red wrap dress, her lucky charm in a way, but something made her pause. She pushed the hangers aside, revealing a crisp white blouse and a pair of wide-legged trousers she'd bought on a whim but never worn. Delilah smiled to herself. It was time for something new. As she got dressed, applying her makeup with careful precision, Delilah thought about how far she'd come. The nervous, unsure person who had first donned that red dress was a far cry from the confident woman she saw in the mirror now. She slipped on a pair of low heels, grabbed her portfolio, and headed out the door. The summer sun warmed her face as she walked to the subway, her step light and purposeful. The Spark. Advertising offices were sleek and modern, all glass and chrome with splashes of vibrant color. Olivia greeted her warmly, introducing her to the rest of the creative team. As Delilah presented her ideas, expanding on the impromptu pitch from the coffee shop, she felt a familiar thrill of excitement. This was what she was meant to do. 2 hours later, she emerged from the building with a job offer and a start date for the following Monday. Delilah resisted the urge to skip down the sidewalk, settling instead for a quiet fist pump when she thought no one was looking. She pulled out her phone to call Emma, then hesitated. This moment felt bigger than a quick phone call could capture. Instead, she texted, "Got the job? Celebratory dinner tonight?" Emma's response came almost immediately. "Yes! So proud of you! I'll make reservations! Wear something fabulous!" That evening, Delilah stood in front of her mirror, putting the finishing touches on her outfit. She'd chosen a slinky black dress that hugged her curves in all the right places, paired with strappy heels and statement earrings. Her brown hair fell in soft waves around her shoulders, and her makeup was flawless. As she applied a final swipe of lipstick, Delilah caught her own eye in the mirror. For a moment, she saw a flash of the person she used to be. Scared, uncomfortable, always slightly out of step with the world. But that image faded quickly, replaced by the radiant, self-assured woman she'd become. "You've got this," she told her reflection softly. "You're exactly where you're meant to be." The restaurant Emma had chosen was upscale and trendy, with a stunning view of the city skyline. As they sipped champagne and toasted to new beginnings, Delilah felt a sense of true contentment wash over her. "You know," Emma said, her eyes twinkling, "I always knew you were destined for great things, but I never imagined it would involve my emergency dress and a coffee spill." Delilah laughed, shaking her head. "Life has a funny way of working out, doesn't it? I'm so grateful for that day, Em, and for you. I don't know if I would have had the courage to be myself without your support." Emma reached across the table, squeezing her hand. "You've always had the courage, Del. You just needed a little push to see it." As they finished their meal and stepped out onto the bustling New York street, Delilah took a deep breath, savoring the moment. The city hummed with energy around her, full of possibility and promise. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, the fear, the uncertainty, the moments of doubt, but also the joy, the self-discovery, the feeling of finally being at home in her own skin. Delilah linked her arm through Emma's, smiling up at the twinkling lights of the skyscrapers above. "You know what?" she said. "I think this is going to be the start of something amazing." And as they walked off into the warm summer night, Delilah knew in her heart that it was true. This was just the beginning of her story, and she couldn't wait to see where it would lead.
Thanks for watching, my girlies. Be sure to check out Patreon for more.